Our last course that we're going to talk about now is the Law BCL and Human Rights course, and I am joined by Dr. Maeve O'Rourke. Maeve is a lecturer in human rights at the Irish Centre for Human Rights. The Irish Centre for Human Rights is a centre that is part of NUI Galway School of Law. Maeve is the Programme Director of the Law BCL in Human Rights and also a barrister at 33 Benford Row. Earlier this year, Maeve was appointed to a team to work on establishing an independent investigation into the mother and baby homes. And I will now pass you over to Maeve. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lisa. And it's lovely to see that picture there of our students. I hope you can hear me now, can you?
I can hear you, Maeve, thanks.
Great. It's lovely to see that picture there. That is some of our students from the Irish Centre for Human Rights joining a protest march last year. So as you'll come to see in the rest of my presentation, we do a lot of human rights practical work within the Irish Centre for Human Rights, and that's something that our undergraduate students can get involved in and along the way meet all of the postgraduate students that we also have at the Irish Centre for Human Rights. So just moving to the first slide, I want to introduce you to the very basics of the Law and Human Rights degree. So as Brian said at the beginning, this is one of the full law degrees, so it is possible for you to take all of the subjects that you will need if you wish to become a solicitor or a barrister. And then there are the language options, which is legal French or legal German or Irish, but not Spanish on this degree because that is reserved for the law and business students. And then, like with the other law degrees, there is the option to do the specialist stream. So what I'll explain now is what is different about the Law and Human Rights degree. So the first thing, I suppose, very basically, is that in first year, the cohort of law and human rights students, which is in the range of about 30, they are together for a 10 credit course, which is actually a double module in the second semester. And so over 4 hours a week, they have a very intensive, what I think is very exciting experience of getting to know each other, getting to know the staff, and like I mentioned, our postgraduate masters and PhD students in the Irish Centre for Human Rights, which is a specific building. Anyone who's been on campus might have noticed the yellow building that's at the very beginning of campus, just opposite the cathedral. That is the Irish Centre for Human Rights. And so our first year students spend 4 hours a week in second semester learning with me a module called Human Rights, Law, Concepts, Contemporary Issues, and Philosophies. And I suppose that's a very important part of this degree because one of the issues about human rights lawyering and going on into the world of work of human rights lawyering is that doing it with friends and having a strong community around you is extremely important because it is quite a countercultural way of doing law. As I'll explain, human rights law and human rights as a concept is all about challenging the status quo, asking, is this the right way to treat people? Is there injustice here? Is this the way the law should be actually? So forms of law that sit below, you know, constitutional rights or other rights. And so you're often questioning and often arguing that the way things are in society is not how they should be. And it's really important to have a strong group of people around you as you do that. And also those who are interested in law and human rights, it's important that as they go through their degree, that they feel well supported and that they have other people around them who also are looking at less traditional ways of work, possibly not so focused on corporate and possibly focused on avenues of work. It might be international, it might be in the NGO sector here in Ireland, but avenues that can feel a little bit more difficult to navigate, that there's not just the straight structure available to you as a trainee in the corporate firm, for example. So I think it's wonderful that that cohort of 30 students gets to spend so much time together. So just moving on then, I want to introduce you very quickly to some of the people in the Irish Centre for Human Rights, because this is really the amazing thing about this degree, and I think something that contributes to the students' immense learning in their 4 years, 3 years in Galway, of course, and 1 year in third year outside of the campus, is that from day one, you're not just doing your core modules. As an undergraduate student, you are receiving all of the invitations to everything that happens in the Irish Centre for Human Rights, and that is weekly lunchtime seminars by experts in human rights, both in Ireland and internationally. For example, here's some of our students, some more students going on climate strike at the beginning of last academic year. They're master's students. They were joined by undergraduate students. In the top right corner, you'll see Professor Siobhan Mullally, who's the director of the Irish Centre for Human Rights. She is currently the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking, which is the foremost international expert in the world, protecting the human rights of people subjected to trafficking and intervening in states' efforts to have laws that sufficiently prevent human trafficking and protect people who have been placed in situations of trafficking. So she has immense experience. To the top left, I've noted the International Criminal Court Summer School, just to make the point, but you'll see this if you go onto the website of the centre, that we have very expert professors of international humanitarian law and international criminal law, Professor Shane Darcy, Professor Ray Murphy, who not only operate, I suppose, as academics, but also advise governments all over the world, and also international institutions. And our first year students and second year students are all invited to come to our summer school in June on the International Criminal Court. We have a human rights podcast. Our undergraduate students are as welcome as our postgraduate students to get involved in making podcasts if they wish, and like I say, in engaging in everything that goes on. And there's a picture of me in the bottom right, just to, I suppose, prompt the point that in addition to my academic work, like all of my colleagues in the Centre for Human Rights, I am frequently doing practical human rights advocacy, both in Ireland, in Europe and internationally, to try and change state practice. And I have a particular background in advocating for the rights of people who were subjected to so-called historical abuse in Ireland. So just moving quickly to the next slide, the last thing I want to mention about the Irish Centre for Human Rights is that it's also the home to the Global Legal Action Network, which you can also look up. And they are currently taking a case to the European Court of Human Rights on behalf of young people in Portugal, and they are taking it against 33 countries in relation to climate injustice. And they are also taking cases, for example, here on the left, in relation to the placement of people seeking asylum into inflatable rafts and sending them back out to sea off the coast of Greece. So all of that work is available for you to get involved in on an extracurricular basis, as well as having guest lectures in our courses. So moving on very quickly, what is the study of human rights? So I just want to really briefly introduce you to the fact that this is a very creative area of law, because human rights is a concept that is not just a legal one. So by studying human rights alongside your law degree, you will be introduced to other disciplines. Philosophy, because human rights is a philosophical concept as well as a legal one. It's where the law comes from. And so in first year with me, you will be introduced to questions of what it means to be human, what it is that we all share, Why is it that we all have particular entitlements? What are those entitlements? What is injustice? What does equality mean? And these are important questions to think about, because human rights law is very flexible and it's open to interpretation over time. And so where do we get the content for what international law or the Irish Constitution or other human rights laws, where do we get the content for what those laws actually mean? A lot of it is about philosophical thought, and in particular, I introduced my first years to feminist theories of power and oppression and inequality. And so moving on, human rights is also, importantly, a political idea. And so this is important to realise too, and this brings you as a law student into another discipline as well, of politics and political thought. So over the centuries, the notion of who we are as humans, philosophically speaking, that we uniquely have the capacity to reason, means that actually how the state should act is that it should stay out of our business and give us freedom of speech, give us freedom to assemble. So we see that constitutions come from philosophical ideas of human rights, and particular ideas about how the state should treat citizens mean that certain human rights find more prominence than others, depending on the country, depending on the constitution. So at the moment in Ireland, you may know that there are whole debates over whether we should have a constitutional right to housing. And we protect more civil and political rights, freedoms from invasion in our privacy, rather than rights to socioeconomic resources. And that's a choice, and it's not something that's set in stone. So we will look at political ideas of human rights. And then moving on, lastly, I suppose the key area of human rights in terms of your study is, of course, the legal instruments that came from the international community of states realizing that what happened in World War II needed laws in place to prevent it ever happening again. And so we see the European Convention on Human Rights coming from that period, and all of the international human rights treaties with the creation of the UN itself. And okay, so moving on then to what I had last to finish up. What work does a human rights lawyer do? It is an extremely creative degree, I think, because what a human rights lawyer does is an extremely creative field. So if you go into practice, and you can see there a picture of a barrister, Alexander Wilson, who actually is a young barrister in the UK who's brought out a brilliant book called In Black and White about racism within the legal profession. But if you go into legal practice as a human rights lawyer, you're often involved in actually challenging the way that the law currently works. So it's an exciting way of practicing law. You might get involved in movements for social change. And so I have pictures there of people doing essentially what might also be considered investigative journalism, and finding evidence, going out, filming, taking notes, interviewing people. You might get involved in advocacy for political change. So you might be working with an NGO that's advocating for new laws. So I have a picture there of giving evidence to the Oireachtas. Or you might be working in fields of law that might not be considered human rights law, but actually are protecting human rights on a daily basis. So up the top middle, the picture of the lawyers who all rushed to US airports when Donald Trump brought in his immigration ban to actually do their work as immigration lawyers, which is of course human rights work. So that's the point, I suppose, also to say that so many areas of law, criminal law, housing law, education law, family law, all involve protecting human rights on a daily basis, and studying human rights alongside your law degree will really enable you to see that fact and to do that work as best you can. So that's all I'll say, and I hope that we can answer your questions later as well.